The flashpoint erupted not with a whimper of diplomatic failure, but with the earth-shattering roar of a kinetic strike, a seismic tremor radiating from deep beneath the Iranian plateau. The world recoiled, stunned, as news began to filter through. The United States military had delivered a devastating blow, employing its most formidable conventional penetrator weapon against what analysts universally understood to be a critical, hardened target within the adversary's subterranean complex. This was no mere pinprick. This was a deliberate, calculated application of overwhelming force, a strategic message etched in shattered concrete and pulverized rock. The immediate question that seared through the global security apparatus, through every secure briefing room from Langley to the war rooms of our adversaries, was not simply what had happened, but why now? What tectonic shift in the grand chessboard had precipitated such a dramatic and irreversible escalation? And what did this kinetic action truly reveal about the underlying, corroding foundations of American strategic deterrence and the increasingly volatile global order? This singular, decisive strike transcends the immediate tactical success or failure of a targeted operation. It compels us to confront a far more profound, systemic question. How did we arrive at a point where the application of a weapon designed to penetrate hundreds of feet of fortified rock became the seemingly inevitable solution to a geopolitical challenge that has festered for decades? Is this a genuine demonstration of unmatched lethality, a surgical affirmation of America's unwavering commitment to preventing proliferation and safeguarding its interests? Or does it, conversely, expose a deeper rot within the defense establishment, a dangerous over-reliance on kinetic solutions precisely because the non-kinetic levers of national power have been allowed to atrophy, compromised by an administrative deep state increasingly focused on ideological policy over strategic deterrence? The answer, I fear, lies in dissecting the anatomy of this moment, not as an isolated event, but as a direct consequence of a fundamental miscalibration of American grand strategy and the insidious weaponization of our own defense bureaucracy. To truly comprehend the implications of such a strike, we must first understand the instrument itself. We are not discussing a conventional cruise missile or a general-purpose bomb. The weapons deployed in such an operation, typically variants of the Massive Ordnance Penetrator, or MOP, represent the pinnacle of non-nuclear kinetic power designed specifically to neutralize deeply buried and hardened targets. These munitions are gargantuan, often weighing over 15 tons, packed with thousands of pounds of high explosive, and engineered with hardened steel casings capable of withstanding extreme forces as they burrow through multiple layers of concrete, earth, and rock. Their development was a multi-decade endeavor, an iterative process born from the lessons of previous conflicts where adversaries learned to shield their most critical assets underground, often beyond the reach of conventional aerial bombardment. The requirement for such a weapon emerged from a clear and present threat: the proliferation of WMD programs by rogue states, often shielded by sophisticated underground complexes that defied traditional targeting methodologies. This wasn't merely an engineering challenge. It was a strategic imperative, a doctrinal response to a shifting battle space where the enemy's center of gravity had literally gone subterranean. The genesis of these bunker buster programs reveals a critical insight into the Pentagon's long-term strategic planning, or what passes for it. For years, intelligence assessments consistently highlighted the vulnerability gap. How do you neutralize a target hundreds of feet beneath the surface when diplomacy fails and ground invasion is deemed politically unpalatable or operationally infeasible? The answer, according to the acquisition pipeline, was technology. Defense contractors, ever eager to meet a meticulously defined requirement with a lucrative contract, poured resources into developing these specialized munitions. This process, often opaque to the public, involves years of research and development, exhaustive testing, and a complex interplay between the Joint Requirements Oversight Council (JROC), the various combatant commands, and the industrial base. Each stage is an opportunity for bureaucratic inertia to set in, for cost overruns to mount, and for political considerations to subtly shape the technical specifications. Yet, the existence and eventual deployment of such a weapon underscore a stark reality. Despite rhetorical commitments to diplomacy, the Pentagon recognized the enduring necessity of a kinetic option for the most intractable proliferation challenges. Now, consider the adversary, Iran. For decades, the regime in Tehran has pursued a multi-pronged strategy aimed at securing regional hegemony and, critically, achieving a nuclear deterrent. This pursuit is not merely ideological. It is deeply rooted in the regime's strategic calculus for survival, a perceived guarantee against external intervention. Their nuclear program, cloaked in secrecy and consistently underestimated by successive administrations, has advanced despite international pressure, sanctions, and periodic acts of sabotage. The choice of deeply buried facilities, often in mountainous terrain, was a direct countermeasure to anticipated air strikes, an attempt to render their most sensitive assets invulnerable. This has been a slow-motion strategic failure for the United States, an inability to halt a determined adversary through either coercive diplomacy or conventional deterrence. Each failed diplomatic framework, each concession, each attempt to manage the problem rather than decisively solve it, only emboldened the regime and allowed their program to advance another critical step. The administrative defense state, frequently caught in a cycle of short-term thinking and politically expedient narratives, consistently failed to grasp the long-term, existential threat posed by a nuclear-armed Iran, content instead to kick the strategic can down the road. The decision to employ a bunker buster against such a target reflects a moment of stark strategic clarity or perhaps desperation. It signals that all other options, sanctions, cyber operations, covert action, and certainly diplomacy, were deemed insufficient to achieve the desired effect. This kinetic escalation represents a profound failure of strategic deterrence and a deliberate abdication of consistent force readiness over prior administrations. True deterrence is not merely the threat of force. It is the credibility of that threat, the unwavering conviction in the adversary's mind that the cost of transgression will be immediate and overwhelmingly punitive. When that credibility erodes through years of vacillation, mixed signals, and the prioritization of globalist ideologies over national security interests, a kinetic strike becomes not an option, but a perceived necessity to reestablish a lost equilibrium. The question then becomes, why did America's strategic credibility fall to such a low ebb that only a weapon of this magnitude could momentarily restore it? Inside the earring of the Pentagon, and within the Situation Room of the White House, the debates leading to such an authorization are intense and fraught with monumental consequences. The intelligence community would have presented a mosaic of high-confidence assessments, outlining the target's criticality, its function, and the projected impact of various kinetic and non-kinetic options. CENTCOM, as the geographic combatant command responsible for the region, would have wargamed the operational details, assessing risks to personnel, platforms, and the broader regional stability. This is where the rubber meets the road, where the theoretical gives way to the kinetic reality. The planning of such a strike involves meticulous coordination, precise intelligence on target coordinates, hardened facility blueprints, atmospheric conditions, and the complex airspace management required for stealth platforms to deliver their payload with pinpoint accuracy. The mission profile for a bunker buster often involves sophisticated stealth bombers, platforms that represent billions in taxpayer investment, flying thousands of miles, often requiring multiple aerial refueling operations to reach their objective. This is not a casual undertaking. It is a monumental display of logistical and operational prowess, a capability that few nations possess. The strategic doctrine underpinning such a strike is rooted in the concept of escalation dominance. This doctrine posits that by demonstrating an ability and willingness to escalate a conflict to a level that the adversary cannot match, one can compel compliance or prevent further aggression. However, In the hands of an administration that has often projected weakness or inconsistency, escalation dominance can quickly devolve into a dangerous gamble. The question isn't just whether the U.S. can strike, but whether the adversary believes the U.S. will strike, and more importantly, whether the adversary understands the strategic message being sent. With Iran, a regime steeped in revolutionary ideology and asymmetric warfare, the interpretation of U.S. actions is rarely straightforward. They view U.S. military power through a lens of resistance, constantly seeking vulnerabilities and opportunities to exploit perceived hesitations. A strike of this nature, therefore, isn't just about destroying a facility. It's about altering an adversary's risk calculus, forcing them to reconsider the long-term viability of their strategic objectives. The enduring challenge for the U.S. military, particularly in the Middle East, has been the bureaucratic struggle to reconcile grand strategy with tactical reality. The administrative defense state, with its layers of entrenched interests and career survivalists, often prioritizes resource allocation based on political expediency or the latest ideological trend, rather than on pure war-fighting lethality. How many billions have been diverted from critical research and development for next-generation combat platforms, or from maintaining robust munition stockpiles, into programs promoting diversity, equity, and inclusion, or pursuing climate change initiatives? This is not just a rhetorical question. It has direct kinetic consequences. A military distracted by social engineering and administrative bloat is a military whose warfighters are less prepared, less equipped, and ultimately, less lethal. The precise moment of this bunker-buster strike, therefore, shines a harsh light on the delicate balance between maintaining a cutting-edge force and allowing it to be hollowed out by internal, bureaucratic decay. The capability to deliver such a strike exists because of decades of investment, but the necessity of delivering it now suggests a prior failure of policy and preparedness. Moreover, we must consider the motivations of the military-industrial complex, MIC, in the context of such an event. Every kinetic action is a validation of a weapons system, a demonstration of its efficacy, and often a catalyst for follow-on orders, maintenance contracts, and the funding of next-generation capabilities. The development and deployment of a weapon like the MOP, for instance, involves a complex ecosystem of prime contractors and subcontractors, each with a vested interest in the continuation of defense spending. While the tactical need for such a weapon is undeniable, the underlying economic incentives cannot be ignored. The revolving door between the Pentagon, defense contractors, and Capitol Hill ensures a steady flow of influence and information, subtly shaping requirements and procurement priorities. Is it always for the warfighter's greatest good? Or does it sometimes serve to perpetuate a cycle of spending and intervention, creating a self-licking ice cream cone of perpetual conflict? A strategic realist must ask these uncomfortable questions, peeling back the layers of public rhetoric to expose the raw economic realities driving parts of our defense policy. The global consequences of a U.S. bunker-buster strike on Iran are far-reaching and inherently unpredictable, precisely because the international system is not a static environment, but a dynamic interplay of competing interests and volatile actors. Regionally, our allies like Israel and Saudi Arabia would likely breathe a collective sigh of relief, seeing this as a belated but decisive assertion of American power to curb a mutual adversary's nuclear ambitions. However, this relief would be tempered by the palpable fear of Iranian retaliation. Iran's long-established playbook involves asymmetric responses, activating proxy forces in Iraq, Syria, Lebanon, and Yemen, targeting maritime shipping in the Strait of Hormuz, or even orchestrating cyber attacks against critical infrastructure. The potential for a wider regional conflagration is immense, requiring a rapid surge in U.S. force posture and vigilance across multiple domains. This is where the distinction between a surgical strike and the cascading effects of kinetic action becomes starkly apparent. The former is controlled, the latter, an unpredictable maelstrom. Beyond the immediate region, The strike reverberates through the grand strategies of near-peer adversaries like Russia and China. For Moscow, it might be viewed as a demonstration of U.S. resolve, but also as an opportunity to condemn perceived American unilateralism, strengthen its own strategic ties with Iran, and test the coherence of Western alliances. For Beijing, the calculation is more complex. While not directly involved, China views any major U.S. military action through the lens of its own ambitions in the Indo-Pacific. Would they see this as a distraction, drawing American resources and attention away from the pivot to Asia that has consistently proven difficult to execute? Or would they interpret it as a stark warning, reinforcing their own drive to develop hardened, subterranean facilities and advanced anti-access/area denial A2/AD capabilities to deter similar U.S. interventions in their sphere of influence? The long-term implications for the global balance of power hinge on these interpretations, shaping future arms races and strategic postures. This event also exposes the inherent limitations and potential failures of the administrative state's approach to global power projection. The concept of the pivot to Asia, while strategically sound on paper, has been repeatedly derailed by the enduring quagmire of the Middle East. Resources, attention, and political capital are finite. Every crisis in one theater inevitably siphons these away from another. The deep state, with its bureaucratic inertia and its commitment to established foreign policy frameworks, struggles to execute a clean strategic shift. It often finds itself entangled in legacy commitments, unable to disengage from conflicts that no longer serve America's primary national interest, primarily because those entanglements benefit certain bureaucratic fiefdoms or defense contractors. The bunker buster strike in this context might be seen as a necessary evil to address a persistent threat, but it also highlights the systemic inability to prevent such threats from escalating to this point in the first place, thus perpetuating the very cycle of interventionism that undercuts a focused America First grand strategy. The behind-the-scenes reality within the E-ring and the intelligence community is one of constant tension. Intelligence officers, grounded in empirical data and the dispassionate assessment of adversary capabilities, often find themselves at odds with political appointees whose priorities may be more aligned with public optics or ideological narratives than with kinetic reality. The planning of a strike like this involves a meticulous target validation process, where intelligence analysts provide high-confidence assessments not only of the target's physical characteristics, but also its strategic significance and the potential second-order effects of its destruction. This intelligence then feeds into the operational planning cells, where experts determine the optimal weapons system, delivery platform, and attack trajectory to achieve the desired effect with minimal collateral damage. However, even with the most precise intelligence and the most advanced weapons, there's always an element of uncertainty, a variable that cannot be fully accounted for by even the most sophisticated wargaming models. It's a high-stakes poker game where the stakes are regional stability and human lives. One insider reveal that often goes unsaid within the public discourse is the quiet frustration of career military professionals with the politicization of the officer corps and the overall erosion of strategic focus within the Pentagon. Many senior officers, veterans of decades of actual combat, privately lament the diversion of resources and attention towards social programs and diversity initiatives that, while perhaps noble in intent, do not contribute to kinetic lethality or warfighter readiness. They see a direct correlation between this administrative bloat and the increased necessity for dramatic, high-stakes kinetic actions like a bunker buster strike. When diplomacy is weak and the military is perceived as more concerned with ideological conformity than combat effectiveness, adversaries are emboldened. The choice to deploy such a powerful weapon, therefore, is not merely a statement of strength. It can also be interpreted as a desperate attempt to compensate for a more generalized decline in the coherence and credibility of American foreign policy. A decline exacerbated by a defense bureaucracy that has lost its way. The long-term implications for U.S. global supremacy are significant. Does this strike restore America's credibility as the indispensable nation, or does it merely underscore a pattern of reactive interventionism that drains resources and undermines the long-term strategic competition with China and Russia? The answer is likely nuanced. On one hand, it demonstrates an unparalleled capability and a willingness to act decisively when core national security interests are perceived to be at stake. This can indeed reestablish a degree of deterrence against immediate proliferation threats. On the other hand, it also reveals a persistent inability to achieve objectives through less destructive means, perpetuating a cycle of intervention that some argue accelerates the decline of the American empire by overextending its military and financial resources. The very act of deploying such a potent weapon, while tactically necessary in the immediate context, raises fundamental questions about the sustainability of a foreign policy doctrine that repeatedly resorts to kinetic solutions. This event forces us to confront the reality of how America's global standing is perceived by both allies and adversaries. Will allies view this as a welcome return to robust leadership, or as a dangerous escalation that could destabilize an already fragile region? Will adversaries be deterred, or will they redouble their efforts to develop asymmetric countercapabilities, further accelerating the global arms race? The answers to these questions will shape not only the future of nuclear non-proliferation efforts, but also the broader trajectory of great power competition. The long shadow cast by this bunker-buster strike will influence defense budgets, strategic alliances, and diplomatic postures for years to come, forcing a re-evaluation of the costs and benefits of America's role as the world's sole superpower. Ultimately, this decisive kinetic action against a hardened Iranian target is not a singular event to be analyzed in isolation. It is a symptom, a visible manifestation of deeper structural challenges facing American grand strategy and the U.S. defense establishment. It underscores the critical need for a return to first principles analysis, stripping away the layers of bureaucratic rhetoric and ideological posturing to focus squarely on war-fighting lethality, strategic deterrence, and the uncompromising pursuit of America's national interests. The nation's warfighters deserve nothing less than a lethal, focused, America-first military, unburdened by administrative bloat and ideological distractions, capable of executing decisive action when all other options fail. This strike, however spectacular, must serve as a stark reminder of what happens when strategic clarity gives way to diplomatic fantasy, and when the defense apparatus prioritizes anything other than kinetic supremacy. The fundamental question that echoes from the pulverized remnants of that subterranean facility is this: as the world recoils from the shockwave, has America truly reasserted its strategic will, or has this moment merely set the stage for an even more perilous and unpredictable confrontation, revealing the ultimate fragility of an empire that has lost its strategic focus?